Meera Malhotra had followed her husband to his office that night to confront him about the affair she discovered. But she never imagined that his 23-year-old mistress had already planned for this moment and had been waiting in the shadows with a weapon. If you're fascinated by true crime stories that reveal the dark side of corporate power and deadly obsessions, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. These shocking cases will keep you on the edge of your seat, and you won't want to miss a single episode. But let's go back to where it all began. The 62nd floor of Mumbai's prestigious Nariman Point business district housed the gleaming headquarters of Malhotra Enterprises, one of India's fastest-growing tech conglomerates. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Arabian Sea, while the interior design screamed success, with its imported Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and handcrafted executive furniture worth more than most people's annual salaries. This was where 45-year-old Arjun Malhotra had built his empire from small software startup into a billion-dollar corporation that employed over 3,000 people across 12 countries. His corner office, spanning nearly 1,000 square feet, was a monument to his achievements, with awards lining the walls, photographs with government ministers and Bollywood celebrities displayed prominently, and a custom-made mahogany desk that had cost more than a luxury car. But on the night of October 23, 2024, this temple of corporate success would become the scene of a double murder that would shock Mumbai's business elite and expose the deadly consequences of mixing power, passion, and betrayal. Arjun Malhotra was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went. Standing 6 feet tall with salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, wearing custom-tailored suits from London's Savile Row, he exuded the confidence that came from being worth over $800 million. His marriage to Meera had been arranged by their families 22 years earlier, and while it had produced 2 successful children and maintained the appearance of domestic happiness, those closest to the family knew that passion had long since faded from their relationship. Meera, now 41, had devoted her life to being the perfect corporate wife, organizing charity galas, managing their multiple properties, and ensuring their children received the best education money could buy. She had sacrificed her own career as a successful interior designer to support Arjun's ambitions, believing that their partnership was built on mutual respect and shared goals for their family's future. What she didn't know was that her husband had been systematically destroying that foundation for the past 8 months through his obsessive affair with one of his employees. The woman who would ultimately orchestrate both their deaths had joined Malhotra Enterprises just over a year earlier, fresh from completing her MBA at one of Mumbai's top business schools. 23-year-old Riya Sharma possessed the kind of striking beauty that stopped conversations when she entered a room, with long dark hair, expressive eyes, and a smile that could disarm even the most hardened business executives. But beneath her polished exterior lay an ambitious mind that viewed relationships as stepping stones to the wealth and status she believed she deserved. Riya Sharma's journey to Malhotra Enterprises had been carefully calculated from the moment she graduated with her MBA from the Indian Institute of Management. Unlike her classmates who settled for traditional corporate roles, Riya had studied the personal lives and business dealings of Mumbai's most powerful CEOs, identifying Arjun Malhotra as the perfect target for her ultimate ambition, becoming the wife of a billionaire. Her application to his company wasn't about career growth. It was about access to a man who could transform her from a middle-class girl from Pune into one of India's wealthiest women. She had spent months preparing for their first meeting, researching his business philosophy, his personal interests, even his favorite restaurants and vacation destinations. When she finally sat across from him during her interview for the senior marketing coordinator position, wearing a strategically chosen navy blue dress that was professional yet subtly alluring, she knew she had captured his attention completely. Arjun had interviewed hundreds of candidates over the years, but something about Riya's combination of intelligence, beauty, and barely concealed ambition fascinated him in a way that made him forget about his wedding ring and the family photographs on his desk. Within 3 weeks of joining the company, Riya had engineered their first private dinner under the pretense of discussing a major client presentation. She had chosen the restaurant carefully, upscale enough to impress him, intimate enough to create the right atmosphere, and discreet enough to avoid unwanted attention from Mumbai's business gossip network. That evening, as they shared expensive wine and discussed market expansion strategies, Arjun found himself drawn not just to her professional insights, but to the way she looked at him with undisguised admiration, something he hadn't experienced in years of marriage to Meera. For a man who was accustomed to being respected and even feared in business circles, Riya's obvious attraction to his power and success was intoxicating. The affair began 2 weeks later in his private office after hours. Riya had stayed late to finish a project, knowing that Arjun typically worked until well past 9 p.m. When she knocked on his door at 10:30 that night, claiming she needed his approval on some documents, she was wearing a different outfit than what she'd had on during the day, a black dress that hugged her figure and left little doubt about her intentions. What happened next was a carefully orchestrated seduction that Arjun believed he was initiating, but which Riya had been planning since the moment she accepted the job offer. Their relationship quickly evolved from stolen moments in his office to elaborate secret getaways at five-star hotels in Goa, Dubai, and Singapore, always disguised as business trips that Riya convinced Arjun were essential for client relations. She had studied his marriage carefully, identifying exactly what was missing from his relationship with Meera, and positioning herself as everything his wife wasn't. While Meera focused on their children's education and family responsibilities, Riya was spontaneous and adventurous. While Meera had grown comfortable with their established routines, Riya brought excitement and unpredictability. While Meera took their wealth for granted, Riya expressed genuine awe at Arjun's achievements and made him feel like the powerful, desirable man he still believed himself to be. But Riya's ultimate goal wasn't to be Arjun's mistress. It was to replace Meera entirely. She began subtly undermining his marriage during their intimate conversations, pointing out how his wife didn't truly appreciate his success, how she seemed more interested in social status than in supporting his dreams, how she had become complacent and taken their relationship for granted. She painted herself as the woman who truly understood him, who shared his vision for the future, who deserved to be by his side as he continued building his empire. Within 6 months, she had convinced Arjun that his marriage was a burden holding him back from true happiness, and that their affair was actually the beginning of his real life. Meanwhile, Meera Malhotra was beginning to notice subtle changes in her husband's behavior that made her increasingly suspicious. Arjun had always been a workaholic, but his schedule had become even more erratic, with frequent late-night meetings and weekend business trips that seemed to have no clear purpose or documented results. He had become secretive about his phone, taking calls in private and password-protecting his devices in ways he never had before. More troubling was the emotional distance that had developed between them. After 22 years of marriage, Meera knew her husband's moods and patterns, and the man coming home to their Bandra penthouse each night seemed like a stranger wearing Arjun's face. The first concrete evidence came when Meera discovered a credit card statement that Arjun had forgotten to hide, showing charges for expensive jewelry, luxury hotel rooms, and romantic dinners at restaurants they had never visited together. When she confronted him about the mysterious expenses, he claimed they were business-related entertainment costs, but his explanation was vague and defensive in a way that confirmed her worst fears. She began her own investigation, hiring a private detective who quickly uncovered the extent of Arjun's affair with his young employee. The photographs the detective provided showed Arjun and Riya in compromising situations at various hotels and restaurants around Mumbai and beyond. But what shocked Meera most wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the expression of genuine happiness on her husband's face in every image. In their own family photos, Arjun looked successful and satisfied, but in these secret photographs with Riya, he looked alive in a way Meera hadn't seen in years. The realization that her husband had found with another woman the passion that had long since disappeared from their own relationship was more devastating than the affair itself. As October 2024 progressed, the situation reached a breaking point. Riya had begun pressuring Arjun to file for divorce, arguing that their love was too powerful to be constrained by a marriage that no longer brought him joy. She had calculated that as his second wife, she would be entitled to a significant portion of his wealth, and her youth and beauty would give her decades to enjoy the lifestyle she had always craved. But Arjun was hesitant, knowing that a high-profile divorce would damage both his business reputation and his standing in Mumbai's conservative social circles. He kept promising Riya that he would leave Meera soon, but as the months passed with no action, she began to suspect that he was never going to choose her over the security and respectability of his established family life. On October 23rd, everything would come to a violent head in the marble-floored executive suite where Arjun had built his fortune. None of the three people who would gather there that night could have imagined how their tangled web of love, betrayal, and ambition would end in double murder, destroying not just lives but also one of Mumbai's most successful business empires. The evening of October 23rd began like any other at the Malhotra residence, with Meera preparing dinner while Arjun claimed he would be working late on a crucial merger deal that required his personal attention. But this time, Meera had decided she would no longer be the passive wife who accepted her husband's lies without question. Armed with the evidence her private detective had gathered over the past month, including photographs, hotel receipts, and detailed reports of Arjun's movements, she was finally ready to confront both her husband and his mistress about the affair that was destroying her family. She had spent hours that afternoon rehearsing exactly what she would say, how she would demand that Arjun choose between his marriage and his obsession with a woman young enough to be their daughter. What she didn't know was that Riya Sharma had already made that choice for him, and had spent weeks preparing for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Meera told her household staff that she was going to surprise her husband at the office with his favorite dinner from their wedding anniversary restaurant, a gesture that would have been romantic under different circumstances, but now served as her cover story for what she really planned to do. She drove through Mumbai's evening traffic with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, practicing the words she would use to confront the woman who had stolen her husband's affection and threatened everything she had built over 2 decades of marriage. The private detective had confirmed that Riya typically stayed late on Wednesday nights, often until well past 10 p.m., ostensibly working on projects, but actually spending intimate time with Arjun in his office after the rest of the staff had gone home. Meanwhile, 62 floors above the street, Riya was putting the final touches on her own plan. She had grown tired of waiting for Arjun to find the courage to leave his wife, and had decided that if he wouldn't choose her voluntarily, she would force his hand by creating a situation where he had no other option. Hidden in her designer handbag was a small digital recorder that she planned to use to capture Arjun admitting to their affair and his plans to divorce Meera. With this recording, she could threaten to expose him publicly if he didn't follow through on his promises, using his own words as leverage to secure the wealthy lifestyle she had been working toward since the day she accepted the job at his company. Arjun himself was completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf him. He had spent the day in back-to-back meetings with potential investors, followed by a conference call with his Singapore office that had run longer than expected. By the time he finally made it to his private office at 9:15 p.m., he was exhausted and looking forward to spending a quiet evening with Riya, perhaps ordering expensive takeout and planning their next secret weekend getaway. He had no idea that his wife was already in the building, having used her executive spouse access card to enter through the private garage, or that Riya had been making her own preparations for a confrontation that would end their affair one way or another. The 47-floor executive suite was eerily quiet at that hour, with only the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Mumbai traffic filtering through the thick glass windows. Motion sensor lights flickered on as Meera made her way through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms toward her husband's corner office, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors with each determined step. She had been in this building countless times for company parties and official functions, but never before had she felt like an intruder in the empire she had helped her husband build through years of sacrifice and support. As she approached the executive wing, she could see lights spilling from under Arjun's office door and hear the low murmur of voices engaged in what sounded like an intimate conversation. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized that her worst fears were being confirmed in real time. Not only was her husband having an affair, but he was conducting it brazenly in the office that bore his name, surrounded by the awards and photographs that documented their life together as a family. Inside the office, Riya had begun her own confrontation with Arjun, but not the one either of them had expected. Instead of the romantic evening he had anticipated, she had immediately launched into an ultimatum that caught him completely off guard. She demanded that he file for divorce within the next 30 days, threatening to expose their affair to his business partners, his children, and the media if he refused to make their relationship public. Her voice carried a hard edge that Arjun had never heard before, and for the first time since their affair began, He realized that the young woman he thought he had been seducing had actually been manipulating him from the very beginning. The argument escalated quickly as Arjun tried to explain the complexities of his situation, the potential damage to his business reputation, and his concerns about the impact on his children's lives. But Riya had no patience for his explanations or his attempts to buy more time. She had invested 8 months of her life in this relationship with the expectation that it would lead to marriage and wealth, and she was not prepared to accept anything less than complete victory. She pulled out the digital recorder and began threatening to release their private conversations unless he agreed to her demands immediately. It was at this moment, as their voices rose in anger and desperation, that Meera finally reached the office door. Through the frosted glass panel, she could see 2 figures facing each other in what was clearly a heated argument, and she realized that she was witnessing the breakdown of the affair that had destroyed her marriage. But instead of feeling vindicated or relieved, she felt a rage so pure and powerful that it surprised her with its intensity. For months she had imagined this moment, but she had always pictured herself as the victim confronting her betrayers. Now, hearing them argue about the future they had planned without her, she realized that she was not going to be the passive victim in this story. What happened next would be debated by forensic experts and criminal psychologists for months afterward. Meera pushed open the office door just as Riya was threatening to destroy Arjun's reputation unless he agreed to her ultimatum. The shock of seeing his wife standing in the doorway caused Arjun to stumble backward, knocking over a crystal award that shattered against the marble floor. But it was Riya's reaction that would prove most significant. Instead of showing shame or embarrassment at being caught, she looked directly at Meera with an expression of cold triumph and said the words that would seal all of their fates. Finally, the wife decides to join the conversation. Arjun was just telling me how eager he is to start divorce proceedings so we could be together officially. The confrontation that followed would transform 3 lives forever, as years of deception, betrayal, and suppressed rage exploded in the marble-walled office where Arjun Malhotra had built his fortune. But none of them could have predicted that by morning, 2 would be dead and 1 would be planning the perfect cover-up for double murder. The silence that followed Riya's provocative declaration was so complete that the only sounds in the executive office were the hum of the air conditioning system and the distant honking of Mumbai traffic 62 floors below. Meera stood frozen in the doorway, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder as she processed the full implications of what the younger woman had just said. This wasn't just an affair that could be ended with counseling and forgiveness. This was a calculated attempt to destroy her marriage and steal the life she had spent 22 years building. Arjun looked back and forth between his wife and his mistress, his face pale with the realization that his carefully compartmentalized world was collapsing around him with devastating speed. "Meera, I can explain everything," he began, but his wife cut him off with a bitter laugh that contained no trace of humor. "Explain what exactly, Arjun? How you've been lying to me for 8 months while planning to divorce me for a woman who's barely older than our daughter? How you've been using our family's money to finance your midlife crisis with your employee?" Meera's voice was steady and controlled, but there was something dangerous underneath that made both Arjun and Riya take an involuntary step backward. Riya, however, was not intimidated by the older woman's anger. If anything, she seemed energized by the confrontation, as if she had been waiting for this moment to finally claim her victory publicly. "He's been lying to you because he doesn't love you anymore," she said with cruel directness. "He loves me. He's told me so dozens of times. The only reason he hasn't filed for divorce yet is because he's worried about what people will think, but we've decided that our happiness matters more than social expectations. We've decided," Meera repeated slowly, her eyes moving from Riya to her husband. "So, this is how you're going to handle our marriage? By having your mistress speak for you like you're some kind of child who can't make his own decisions." Arjun finally found his voice, but his words only made the situation worse. "Meera, you have to understand that what Riya and I have is different from what you and I had. It's passionate and exciting in a way that we haven't been for years. I never meant for it to happen, but now that it has, I can't pretend anymore that I'm happy in our marriage." The honest brutality of his confession hit Meera like a physical blow. She had prepared herself for denials, for promises to end the affair, for desperate attempts to save their marriage. She had not prepared herself for her husband to admit that he preferred his 23-year-old mistress to the woman who had sacrificed her own career and dreams to support his ambitions. The rage that had been building inside her for months suddenly crystallized into something cold and precise. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly, walking further into the office and closing the door behind her. "You can't pretend anymore. Neither of you can." Riya sensed the shift in Meera's demeanor and instinctively moved closer to Arjun, as if seeking his protection. But she wasn't finished asserting her dominance in this confrontation. "Look, Mrs. Malhotra, I understand this is difficult for you, but you need to accept reality. Arjun has moved on from your marriage. The sooner you accept that and agree to a civilized divorce, the better it will be for everyone, especially your children." The mention of her children was the final trigger that transformed Meera from a betrayed wife into something far more dangerous. She had endured months of lies and deception, had watched her husband fall in love with another woman, had prepared herself to fight for her marriage. But the casual way this young woman was discussing the destruction of her family, as if her children's stability was just another obstacle to overcome, released something primal and violent inside her. "You think you could just walk into my life and take everything I've worked for?" Meera's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was something in it that made both Arjun and Riya finally recognize the danger they were in. "You think you can destroy my family and then lecture me about what's best for my children?" What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. Meera grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Arjun's desk, a piece that had been a gift from the board of directors to commemorate the company's 10th anniversary. Before either of them could react, she swung it with all her strength at Riya's head. The younger woman tried to duck, but the crystal connected with her temple with a sickening crack that echoed through the marble-walled office. Riya collapsed to the floor, blood immediately beginning to pool beneath her head as she convulsed once and then lay still. Arjun stared in horror at his mistress's motionless body before turning to his wife with an expression of complete shock. "Meera, what have you done? You've killed her." But Meera was not finished. 22 years of suppressed resentment, months of humiliation, and the devastating realization that her husband preferred a woman half her age had combined into a fury that demanded complete satisfaction. When Arjun moved toward Riya's body, perhaps to check if she was still alive, Meera struck again. This time the crystal paperweight caught him in the back of the head as he knelt beside his fallen mistress. He pitched forward, his face hitting the marble floor with a wet sound that would haunt Meera's memory forever. The executive office fell silent except for Meera's heavy breathing as she stood over the two bodies, the bloodied crystal paperweight still clutched in her hand. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Mumbai's skyline glittered with thousands of lights, oblivious to the double murder that had just taken place in one of its most prestigious buildings. Arjun lay motionless beside Riya, a growing pool of blood spreading beneath both their heads and staining the imported Italian marble that had been his pride and joy. For several minutes, Meera remained frozen, staring at what she had done. The rage that had driven her to violence was already fading, replaced by a cold clarity that was somehow even more frightening. She had just murdered her husband and his mistress in a crime of passion that would destroy not only her own life, but also her children's future. Unless, of course, she could find a way to make it look like something else entirely. Setting down the paperweight, Meera began to examine the crime scene with the analytical mind that had made her a successful interior designer before she had sacrificed her career for her family. The office's security cameras were motion-activated, but she knew from attending company functions that they only recorded in the common areas, not in the executive offices where confidential meetings took place. The building's key card system would show that she had entered, but it would also show that Riya had been working late, a pattern that was well established. With the right staging, this could look like a murder-suicide, the desperate final act of a young woman who had realized her married lover would never leave his wife. As she began to formulate her plan, Meera felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in months, she was no longer the victim in this story. She was the one in control, the one who would determine how this narrative would end. And she was determined that it would end with her freedom, her children's security, and her husband's reputation intact, even if she had to manipulate a double murder scene to make it happen. Meera Malhotra had exactly 47 minutes before the building's overnight security guard would make his routine patrol of the executive floors. and she used every second with the precision of someone whose life depended on perfect execution. She carefully wiped her fingerprints from the crystal paperweight before pressing it into Riya's dead hand, positioning the younger woman's body to suggest she had struck Arjun from behind before taking her own life in a fit of desperate remorse. She scattered the contents of Riya's purse across the floor, making sure the digital recorder was prominently displayed as evidence of the affair that had driven the young woman to murder and suicide. Most importantly, she retrieved Arjun's phone and used his fingerprint to unlock it, deleting the hundreds of text messages and photos that documented their 8-month relationship. The staging had to tell a convincing story. A young mistress who had finally snapped when her married lover refused to leave his wife, killing him in a rage before taking her own life rather than face the consequences of her actions. Meera even went so far as to compose a suicide note on Riya's phone, typing with a pen wrapped in tissue to avoid leaving her own fingerprints. "I can't live without him, and I can't live with what I've done. I'm sorry." She placed the phone beside Riya's body, then used the office bathroom to clean the blood from her hands and clothes as thoroughly as possible. By the time she left the building using the same executive garage entrance she had arrived through, Meera had transformed herself back into the perfect corporate wife who had simply been at home all evening, preparing for a charity board meeting the following morning. She drove through Mumbai's late-night traffic with steady hands, already rehearsing the shocked grief she would display when the police came to inform her of her husband's tragic death. The bodies were discovered at 6:23 a.m. the next morning by Arjun's personal secretary, who arrived early to prepare for an important board meeting. Her screams echoed through the executive suite as she stumbled backward from the carnage in her boss's office, immediately calling both the police and building security. Within minutes, the 60th floor was swarming with Mumbai police detectives, forensic specialists, and crime scene photographers documenting what appeared to be a straightforward case of workplace violence turned deadly. Detective Inspector Rajesh Kumar, a 20-year veteran of Mumbai's elite crime investigation unit, initially accepted the murder-suicide scenario that the physical evidence seemed to support. The digital recorder found at the scene contained damning conversations between Arjun and Riya discussing their affair and his promises to divorce his wife. The positioning of the bodies, the weapon in Riya's hand, and the suicide note on her phone all pointed to a young woman who had killed her lover in a moment of passion before taking her own life. But Detective Kumar had built his reputation on noticing details that others missed, and something about the crime scene bothered him from the beginning. The blood spatter patterns didn't quite match the story the physical evidence was telling. Riya's defensive wounds were minimal for someone who had allegedly been in a physical struggle with a man significantly larger and stronger than herself. Most puzzling was the absence of Arjun's DNA under Riya's fingernails, despite the apparent struggle that should have occurred if she had attacked him from behind. The investigation took a dramatic turn when the forensic team discovered a single drop of blood on the bathroom sink that didn't match either victim. DNA analysis revealed it belonged to Meera Malhotra, who claimed she had never been in her husband's office that evening. When confronted with this evidence 3 weeks after the murders, Meera initially claimed she must have cut herself during a previous visit to the office, but security records showed she hadn't been in the building for over 2 months. Under intense questioning, Meera's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. Cell phone tower data showed her phone had been in the vicinity of Malhotra Enterprises at the time of the murders, despite her claims of being at home all evening. Credit card records revealed she had hired a private detective to investigate her husband's affair, providing clear motive for the double murder. Most damaging of all, forensic analysis of the crystal paperweight revealed microscopic traces of Meera's skin cells, proving she had handled the murder weapon despite wearing gloves. The trial became one of Mumbai's most sensational criminal cases, with media coverage focusing on the deadly triangle of betrayal, ambition, and revenge that had destroyed one of India's most successful business families. Meera's defense team argued that she had acted in a moment of extreme emotional disturbance, pushed beyond her limits by her husband's betrayal and his mistress's cruel taunts about destroying her family. The prosecution countered that the careful staging of the crime scene proved premeditation and a callous attempt to escape justice. After 6 weeks of testimony that exposed every intimate detail of the Malhotra family's private lives, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of double murder in the first degree. Judge Riya Sharma sentenced Meera to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years, noting that while the court recognized the emotional trauma that drove her to violence, nothing could justify the calculated murder of two people and the elaborate attempt to cover up her crimes. As Meera was led away in handcuffs, her teenage children watched from the gallery, their lives forever scarred by the actions of parents who had chosen passion and revenge over family stability. The Malhotra business empire, once worth over $800 million, collapsed within months as investors fled and key clients terminated their contracts, unable to separate the company from the scandal that had destroyed its founding family. The executive suite where the murders took place was completely renovated and converted into a conference center, but employees still reported feeling uncomfortable in the space where ambition and betrayal had led to such devastating consequences. The crystal paperweight that had been the murder weapon was destroyed as evidence, but the memory of how quickly love could turn to deadly obsession would haunt everyone connected to the case for years to come. Today, Riya Sharma's parents continue to struggle with the knowledge that their daughter's ambition and manipulation contributed to her own death, while Meera Malhotra serves her sentence in Mumbai's Baikula Women's Prison, having lost everything she had tried so desperately to protect. The case remains a stark reminder that in the world of corporate power and forbidden relationships, the price of betrayal can be measured not just in broken hearts, but in broken lives that can never be repaired.